Cinda Collins-Arsenault, it's really good to have you here. Will you please introduce today's speaker?
So it is my first time back since the fire, and I want to thank all of you for all the outreach of support that I've received. But anyway, today I am here. I am so glad and honored to be able to introduce Lauren Casteel to you today. When I was asked who might be a good person to speak on, when it was International Women's Day, and this is Women's Month, I couldn't think of anyone better than Lauren. As a professional, and I'm not going to say too much about her career, you have it in her bio, but she is extremely skilled, professional, respected, and loved in all the positions that she's done throughout her life. And she has won many, many awards, including being inducted into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame. But I also want to talk to you about her heart. She is one of the kindest, most heartfelt people that I know. And as a mother who loves her children, as a friend, as a member of a community, she has worked hard to bring forward the voices that are not always heard, to add the value, to make everyone feel a part, and to make for greater things to happen. So it's my pleasure to introduce Lauren Casteel.
Cinda. I am sending you the most enormous virtual hug that you could possibly imagine. You all know what a treasure you have in Cinda Collins-Arsenault within your community and certainly within our state. So I am deeply grateful for your extremely kind words, and I could say all of that and far more about you. I'm honored to have been invited by Cinda, who I met because she is an active participant in Beyond Our Borders, which is a giving circle of the Women's Foundation of Colorado. And I hope I'll have enough time for her to speak about some of their work around peace and security during the questions and answers. I also want to thank Boulder Rotary. All of you as local Rotarians and your visiting Rotarians. I had no idea that there would be people on the screen from all over the country and also in Jamaica. So welcome and thank you for joining us. I don't know if Tatiana Hernandez is in the room today, but I want to shout out my dear friend and colleague, Tatiana, who is president and CEO of the Community Foundation serving Boulder County. Deep appreciation, and I'm sure you share this with me, for her leadership, as well as that of Josie Heath, who preceded her. But what a challenging time that Tatiana has faced in Boulder, and her leadership has been invaluable. For those who don't know, Josie is a founding mother of the Women's Foundation of Colorado. I found the video so very inspiring, and it gave me a sense of hope and possibility for the future. And I think we're all craving that. And there's nothing like young people and their truths and their experiences to lift that up for us. So I'm really thrilled that I had the opportunity to see that video. While the fire is certainly not our focus today, I would be remiss if I did not extend, in the spirit of philanthropy that means love from the Women's Foundation of Colorado to our neighbors, to our friends, to families, to your entire community. And also let you know that we have supported through the Boulder Community Foundation and the Wildfire Fund and the King Soopers shooting, that we have given resources in support of your community, as well as promoting organizations that are serving women, such as Mother House, that accepts diapers and tampons and breast pumps and car seats, Safe House Progressive Alliance for Nonviolence, SPAN, providing safety to survivors of domestic violence and their children during this crisis. Sister Carmen, providing food, funds for hotels, Airbnb stays, gift cards for clothing, access to their thrift store for clothing, bedding, and other essential items. And then We Cycle. Some of our Empowerment Council emerging philanthropists recently volunteered at We Cycle. And again, we have promoted giving to them for women and families as they need to purchase high demand for baby gear that is in short supply, specifically cribs, car seats, and strollers. So if you're not familiar with those organizations serving women and families and children in your community, I hope you'll explore those as well. I've had an extraordinary life, but I'm always very clear that I don't consider myself exceptional. I had the privilege of the accidental birth into a family that was had access to education. Many don't realize that for many Black people in America, the GI Bill for returning soldiers after World War II limited their ability to buy houses or to get higher education. My father was fortunate to be able to go to the University of Minnesota, where both he and my mother received their master's degrees. My father later went on, his name was Whitney Young, to become what is known as the Big Six of the civil rights movement. I think of him often these days as we talk about voting rights. My father was there for the signing of the voting rights bill with the president as well as the civil rights bill. But my personal sense of democracy, I'll be quite honest, was really marshaled in when I spent the summer of 1970 for 3 weeks in Czechoslovakia, which was under Russian occupation after the Russian invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968. Again, I find myself thinking about that experience of my history in today's context. There is nothing that brings democracy to light than to be in a country that is filled with soldiers after an invasion. I also, and this is, I'm very honest about this, but I had not only in Czechoslovakia this profound experience, but then went on to Yugoslavia, where I was the survivor of a violent sexual assault, and then returned home. And 6 months later, both my father and my grandfather died within the same week. And then I lost a dear friend almost to the day of my father's death. All of this between the ages of 16 and 17. That trauma caused me to drop out of Swarthmore College. Technically, they disenrolled me, very Swarthmore term. I flunked out, would be a more colloquial way of putting it. But the reason was, and I think for your community, this is an important message, that I didn't have the word trauma in my vocabulary. I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't understand the depression that I was feeling at that time. As your community is healing and wrestling with the traumas that you all have experienced, it warms my heart that people are able to talk about those kinds of issues, and that you have built a loving philanthropic community to ensure that there are services and support for your neighbors, your family members, and for your friends. I ultimately moved to Boulder, and that began a new phase of my journey when I was 20. And I lived in Boulder for a year, where I found my voice in Colorado. I began to consider new possibilities for myself and to forge a path where people saw in me what I did not see in myself. I laugh, though, every time I go to Boulder that I'm in your community to this day, because I spent probably a couple of hours trying to find the bus on Basseline Street. And I would ask people where Basseline Street was, and they would shrug and say, I don't know. Finally, some very kind person interpreted for me that I meant baseline. I'm a New Yorker. I had traveled around the world. And more importantly, as a Black woman, I think about Vaseline and not baseline. So it remained kind of a funny point for me that I found myself needing to be translated for as I navigated Boulder community. I then moved on from television to working in Mayor Pena's office and ultimately philanthropy. All of these things represented different aspects of being in community that have been a theme and a privilege throughout my life. When we talk about Women's History Month, I'd like for us to also recognize women who are so often not recognized, women making a way out of no way. And again, I mentioned organizations within your community that are helping moms and family members and others with different kinds of basic needs to support themselves and their children, not only as a result of the fire, but bitter cold, inflation, all the things that are affecting our communities today in ways that we had not anticipated. I find myself thinking about the song on occasion, What's Going On? I sort of woke up this morning with that refrain in my mind. What's going on? What's going on are challenging times, but as we saw in the video, and as you well know, is also the love of community and our commitment to each other. But when we talk about celebrating women, I think it's similarly important, not only those women making a way out of no way and making sure that they are seen, but also not just the individuals who may be in the Hall of Fame like me. I still find that to be a bit of a wonder, just as I find it a wonder that my daughter won the MacArthur Fellowship this past year at the age of 32 is pretty astonishing. But I also want to think about investments that we make in women, whether they're in philanthropy and policy and venture capital. It's not enough to study, observe, and celebrate the roles of women, but we need to invest in our leadership, freedom, and self-determination. I think again about those people who saw in me something that I did not see in myself at a time when I might have defined myself as broken. I'm here today because of them. So philanthropy, what does that mean? Philanthropic investments in women and girls means nationally support for women and girls. Right now, only 1.9% of all charitable giving goes to women and girls, only 0.5% to women and girls of color. We have a Women and Girls of Color Fund at the Women's Foundation that has supported 32 counties, given $447,000 to 33 organizations. We also have our WINCOME program providing operational support for 19 nonprofits, as well as providing cash assistance, so important during these times. Over $900,000 of investments, as well as commitments to job skills, jobs with benefits, caretaker support, whether it's childcare or elder care, just to name a few. For venture capital, women received just 2.3% of venture capital in 2020. Despite what they do to get funded, they are oftentimes more likely to be successful. A Boston consulting group said that investments in women ultimately deliver higher revenue, more than twice as much per dollar invested. Right now, 0.2% of venture capital goes to Black women and 0.3% to Latinas. Our Women's Impact Investing Giving Circles gave $80,000 in 2020 to Sister Biz and Village Institute, supporting refugees and other women of color and immigrants within our community. $125,000 in 2021 for First Southwest Community Foundation in the southwestern part of the state, as well as Ruby's Market that is similarly supporting entrepreneurs who are newcomers within our communities. Public policy, recent wins for women include the governor signed the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act in our offices to recognize our leadership. The Family Paid Medical Leave Insurance Act as well, and the Crown Act for people like me, women like me, who wear our hair in natural styles, that we will not be penalized within the context of our employment. In this legislative session, we are supporting bills to end sales tax on essential period products and diapers, to create a refundable tax credit for early childhood educators, most of whom are women, and the Reproductive Health Equity Act. We testified this week in support of that, to protect a person's fundamental right to make reproductive health care decisions for themselves. And then lastly, I'll leave you with a global context. Ukraine is on all of our minds. And I talked about my personal experience. Oh, I love you, Dr. Casteel, in the chat. I just told you I flunked out of college. Very kind of you, Cassidy. But in the US and globally, women in the forefront of making democracies more inclusive have been a long-standing and historic trend. Oftentimes, it's as women in Northern Ireland, and certainly today, as Alina Zelenska said, before the war, I once wrote, there are 2 million more women in Ukraine than men, and now it takes on a whole new meaning, because this means that our current resistance also has a particularly female face. Anytime a democracy in the US or abroad is at peril, so is gender, racial, and economic equity. Today, they fight for their lives. Tomorrow, they will engage peace and stabilize community. As the only community foundation serving the state of Colorado with a focus on gender, racial, and economic equity, on behalf of the Women's Foundation of Colorado, I am honored to be here today to see you coming together. I have on my wall the words, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? I heard similar words in your opening that resonated with me as well. And Cassidy, perhaps you can share those with me. The last thing that I'll say is that we go from surviving to thriving. As our poet laureate of the United States once said, with passion and compassion, humor and style, generosity and kindness. And I believe that each of you, from what I've heard today, and Rotarians from around the world, embrace all of those as well. So see women's leadership for what it is. We are extraordinary. No one of us is exceptional. We are necessary as a part of the fabric of your community, and invest in us in order to ensure that the values that you hold dear will move forward into the future. So I will say, actually, Cassidy, I gave you a hard time about the doctor, but I am the recipient of the honorary doctorate degree, community degree from the University of Colorado this year. I'm thrilled. I ultimately graduated from University of Colorado in Denver. So I will have regalia for the first time in my life as a result of that. And it brings me full circle. So see, Cassidy, yes, you totally knew that. But I don't think I can use the word doctor. I'll have to look into that. Questions?
Thank you so much. Your first question is going to be from Chad.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you, Chad.
I have a question for you. As we were preparing for this meeting over the last couple of weeks, your last name stood out to me as something that was familiar, and I couldn't place why, but I think I just realized at the beginning of your conversation why it's familiar. Is your daughter Jordan Casteel?
My daughter is Jordan Casteel, and on the wall behind me is a print a portrait that she did of me. If any of you saw her exhibit at the Denver Art Museum, it was in its full size. It has subsequently been, sadly, I have to be honest, sold at auction abroad. So I'm thrilled to have this smaller print of it. But yes, I am Jordan Casteel's mother. She's one of my 3 children, of whom I am all proud, but certainly she is the one who receives the most attention these days.
So just a statement then and a question. For those of you who don't know, her art is unbelievable. I saw that exhibit. I think I went and I was there 3 or 4 times just because I wanted to go see it again. That was such a phenomenal exhibit. It stands out as one of the top 10 that I've seen, one of the top few that I've seen at the museum since I moved to Colorado. So my question is, can you talk about raising her and how maybe she took some of her artistic, her creative notions from you, and what are some of those things that maybe you nurtured her into?
Well, I like words, not paint. I love paint. I love other people's use of paint, but that is not a gift of mine. Jordan is the only girl among my 3 children. She has a twin brother and an older brother as well, and who are actually both first responders and work on the front line. But Jordan found her sense of peace within our somewhat rambunctious family. We had 2 dogs, 2 cats, like all the things were going on, by sitting at a table and just making things. For her birthday or a holiday gift, I could go to Michael's and fill a cart with stuff, pom-poms, glue sticks, anything possible that she could just create with. It was how she centered herself in the world and what filled her spirit. My mother was on the board of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, and as well as the Lincoln Center. And my mother had begun when we were in Atlanta to collect art of now very famous Black artists who at the time would trade their work, to be quite honest, for a spaghetti dinner. You know, Jordan's done some of that. When you didn't imagine what would happen, you would just sort of give things. So my mother built a collection of Black artists that inspired Jordan, I believe, and she will say over the years as a result of her exposure to them. But what's remarkable about Jordan's journey is that she didn't go to art school. Her first training and her first exposure to oil painting, she's a figurative, very large scale, jordancasteel.com. Cassidy, maybe you can put that in. And she now has 2 pieces that are owned by the Met, another piece that's owned by the Guggenheim. She's all over the world right now and has exhibited in London and Chicago, LA, and represented by galleries in New York as well as abroad. But she traveled to Italy her junior year, just as a junior year abroad program, 2nd semester of college. And she took an oil painting class, a jewelry making class, and a bookmaking class just for the fun of it. And she called me and said, I've never been so happy in my life. I could do oil painting forever. Her spirit and her soul, the texture of oil paint, the color of oil paint. She returned to school, Agnes Scott in Decatur, Georgia, and began to explore studio art, and then went in to teach for America with the intent that maybe she would teach art one day. She ended up teaching special ed, and her lupus kicked in with the stress of that. Jordan was diagnosed with lupus at the age of 19. And came to me and said that she thought maybe she could go to graduate school and get an MFA, although she did not have a bachelor's in fine arts and had only taken this class in Italy. But she was painting in her bedroom. We didn't know that oil paint was toxic, that she should have been wearing gloves. There were all kinds of things that we didn't know. She was using ready-made canvases. To make a long story short, Jordan got into the Yale School of Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, as well as Boulder. She chose to go to Yale because the nature of the type of their program was best suited to the style of her work. She is now among several other artists, Kehinde Wiley, who painted the president, President Obama's portrait, but she is certainly now one of the most recognized, and she just turned 33, of the Yale graduates. But more importantly, like that Genius Award, you know, that's a little cray-cray, as the kids would say, but she remains who she is. She painted the cover of Time magazine. She painted the cover this past year. She also painted the cover of Vogue. You know, the list goes on and on. She has a painting on the cover of Architectural Digest from the home of Swizz Beatz and Alicia Keys. But her work is about humanity. It's about the gaze of men and women and non-binary people, that she has intimate relationships in many instances, many of whom she met on the street vendors and others, or neighbors or friends. Her goal is for us to see each other, to see our power no matter who we are, to take the time to look into the eyes of someone, to hear their stories, and to treat them with respect no matter how, when, and where they come into our lives. So like my dad, she considers herself, as Cinda said at the beginning, to be a voice for the voiceless, but using a brush and a canvas. So thank you for asking that question. I could go on forever, Chad. Very much, but I do need to also acknowledge her brothers who are on the front lines in communities around the country.
Awesome. Awesome. Do we have any questions? Thank you. Here we are. Amazing.
The one thing I would say, just to feel that those of its grandparents, I now have 5 grandchildren, is, you know, to give your children the opportunity to find their passion. The privileges that we had were extraordinary, and the exposures that Jordan had, but to have the room, she was never driven in a particular direction. None of my children were. My wish for them and for my grandchildren is that they have the space and the love and the support to find their own soul's code, whatever that might be.
So thank you so much for speaking to our club. I want to, instead of the present, go to a past generation. And I know Whitney Young was one of the key civil rights leaders, and men often get the credit for the civil rights movement, as is often the case, but actually women were critical to the success of the movement. As I'm sure you know, Ella Baker, Shirley Chisholm, Fannie Lou Hamer, and on and on. And this could be a whole talk, so growing up in Whitney Young's household, could you pick one woman who is a key civil rights leader and kind of tell us a little story about her?
You know, one of the things, well, we have to remember I was only 17 when my father died. As of today, as a matter of fact, is the 51st anniversary of my father's death. For those who don't know, my father drowned off the coast of Nigeria during a Pan-African US conference. And so when I mentioned that my dad is one of the big 6, and thank you, Meryl, for that question. Thank you very much. My father was one of the big 6 of the civil rights movement. Often people will talk about the big 4. They didn't include John Lewis or Dorothy Height. And I'd like to call out Dorothy Height, the National Council of Negro Women. When we talk about the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King's voice was essential, but no one person leads a movement. And there, as you mentioned, were many, many others who were critical to that, many of whom were women. I did have a chance to spend time with Shirley Chisholm, and, you know, it was artists and people, you know, in politics, et cetera, that I had exposure to. But I was also a kid. who, to be quite honest, at times was bored. I wish now that I had had the maturity to sit at the feet of people and to have gained more wisdom. But Dorothy Height, just as Martin brought church to the movement, or A. Philip Randolph, who actually was the inspiration for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, brought labor. John Lewis brought youth. Dorothy Height brought the women. And we need to remember her. And there are national councils of Negro women chapters that are still very active in Colorado and around the country. And I think that that's one name that I would lift up for you today. And, you know, you can't think of any Black person in the civil rights movement who wouldn't also point to their moms who may have been working 2 jobs, or their moms who marched, or their moms who fed marchers, whatever the case may be. Many of you may know the names of Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman. Michael Schwerner's mom taught at my high school in New Rochelle, New York. We moved there when I was in 3rd grade. So that's a beautiful, beautiful question, Meryl, and you're absolutely right. An entire talk. Carlotta Lanier, who was one of the Little Rock Nine, lives in Colorado. We can't forget her as well. And the images, when we talk about being marshaled in, literally being marshaled in for the integration of her school.
We have a question online from Nancy.
Thank you for being there, Lauren. It seems like I was lost touch with what's going on in Denver, being in the Women's Foundation of Colorado, because I was with the Boulder Business and Professional Women for a number of years. And my question to you is, how do you market the opportunities for the women in universities?
How do we market opportunities for women in universities? If I'm understanding your question, is it opportunities for them, if you could clarify, opportunities to be in universities?
No, opportunities of scholarships that you are offering, because you said you give out 2%, I believe, and 3% for Latin women, 2% for the...
Well, I'm saying that that's the small size of current investments in women entrepreneurs nationally.
Oh, nationally.
Investment. Okay. So what I was talking about, the grants through our Women's Impact Investing Giving Circle, our investments are to try to offset that. So they are for women entrepreneurs. The way that we market that, we use social media, email, we send out to organizations everywhere. I talk about it whenever possible. Our next round of opportunities for entrepreneurs to receive these investments will be in the fall. So just by way of background, the Women's Impact Investing Giving Circle, they pool, each individual gives a minimum of $2,000 and pool their resources. We do a call to social enterprise projects. Some may be for-profit, but entrepreneurial endeavors. Mm-hmm. And they select this group of women in this giving circle, select their top candidates who come in and do pitches, which is a very entrepreneurial kind of thing. So we don't hold scholarships, Nancy,
okay,
or higher education. I was proud to start the Reicher Scholarship Program when I was at the Denver Foundation, which is becoming one of the largest programs, and proud to bring in opportunities for students through that, either to go from 2-year college into 4-year, or starting in their sophomore years, continuing with minimal debt. It was like $4,000 of debt when we established the Reicher Scholarship Fund. and cash assistance to ensure that they could meet childcare needs and other kinds of things. So there are lots of scholarship opportunities throughout the state. Denver Scholarship Foundation, Daniels Scholarship, all over. But we don't hold scholarship funds. There's specific requirements to do that. It's one of the tools of a community foundation that we don't actually hold because we felt it would be duplicative of many of the other efforts that already exist.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I probably, got that wrong, but I think this is great for the future women entrepreneurs and leaders. Thank you so much.
Yes. Entrepreneurs, Goldman Sachs issued a report that said one of the biggest investments that could be made in the economy was in Black women small business owners. And people were stunned that this major report, and they've made a significant investment, came out of Goldman Sachs.
Lauren,
Yes.
I haven't gotten to see you in a long time. My name's
I can't
Kitty.
see who this is.
It's Kitty DeKeefer.
Hi, Kitty, how are you?
I am honored to do this close as a past trustee of the Women's Foundation. I'm sorry I'm in the dark here. Boulder Rotary has a long tradition of doing the close, and we so appreciate all the time and effort and energy you put in today to speak with us. It was amazing, and in your honor, we will be giving 100 doses of polio vaccination to help eliminate polio. Boulder Rotary has been working with their partners over the last 30 years to stomp out this horrible disease, and we are pretty darn close. So thank you today for being here. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day and schedule, and we hope to see you in person sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kitty. And I had no idea you were here. So thank you as an honorary trustee. It's a thrill to have you. And I'm so honored by that. Let me just say, vaccines are important, always have been, always will be. I'm so glad that you're doing this for polio because we can't stop fighting these critical diseases that are preventable. So I'm thrilled that you're doing that in my name, and I'm honored to have spent time with you.